Let me ask you a simple question. When the most powerful man in America, Donald Trump, takes to a stage and warns Google and Microsoft about Indians, what does that really tell you? It tells you one undeniable truth: America's greatest fear is no longer China, Russia, or even terrorism. It's the unstoppable rise of Indian minds dominating the very heart of Silicon Valley. Think about it. The companies that decide what you see, what you search, what you buy, and even how you think are run by people with Indian roots. This isn't just success, this is influence at a level Trump cannot control. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly why he's rattled. It's one of the most astonishing shifts of power the modern world has ever seen, yet very few dare to talk about it with honesty. Look across the vast empire of American technology and you'll notice something remarkable. The commanding figures at the very top, the men who make the decisions that shape the lives of billions, are not American-born tech geniuses from Silicon Valley garages, but Indian-born visionaries who arrived with ambition, intellect, and an unbreakable drive to succeed. Google, Microsoft, Adobe, IBM, and a whole host of others. It's no longer just about American innovation. It's about Indian leadership rewriting the rules of global dominance. Now ask yourself, how did this happen? It didn't happen because of luck. It didn't happen because of quotas, and it certainly didn't happen because America handed over the keys. It happened because wave after wave of Indian immigrants came to the United States armed with world-class education, a relentless work ethic, and a culture that values resilience over excuses. They weren't looking for handouts, they were building futures brick by brick, code by code, idea by idea. And now, decades later, their children and grandchildren are sitting at the helm of trillion-dollar empires. That isn't an accident. That is the result of something deeper: discipline, sacrifice, and an almost obsessive commitment to mastering technology. And let's be brutally honest here. These companies, Google, Microsoft, and the rest, are not just businesses. They are the new world superpowers. Their CEOs have more daily influence on your life than your president or your prime minister. They decide what information you consume, how your children learn, how businesses operate, and how governments communicate. When you command that level of influence, you don't just run a company, you shape civilization. And the fact that Indians are leading this charge is a seismic shift that terrifies the old guard of American politics. Because here's the reality: this is not a passing trend. This isn't one or two successful CEOs that you can write off as coincidence. It is a pattern, a clear direction of history, where Indians are emerging as the intellectual backbone of the most powerful industry on earth. And it's not stopping. Every year, American universities are flooded with Indian talent. Every year, more Indian-born engineers and scientists rise through the ranks. And every year, America becomes more reliant on their expertise to keep its technological supremacy alive. That's why there's fear. Not the kind of fear you admit in public, but the kind that gnaws away in private corridors of power. Because if Indians continue to dominate the digital economy, then the balance of cultural and economic influence shifts away from traditional American hands. The narrative of who defines progress, who owns innovation, who controls the digital future. Suddenly, it's no longer purely American, and that, for someone like Trump, is an uncomfortable truth. This dominance is not built on politics, not on slogans, not on empty promises. It's built on raw talent, sheer determination, and a quiet revolution that has placed Indians at the heart of America's greatest strength, its technological empire. Fear. That's the word nobody wants to associate with Donald Trump, yet it hangs in the air every time he talks about Indians running America's most powerful tech empires. He doesn't come out and say it directly, of course. He wraps it in warnings, in rhetoric, in his usual bluster. But scratch beneath the surface and it becomes glaringly obvious. What rattles him is not the idea of India as a nation challenging America on the global stage. It's the fact that Indians already sit inside America's own house, commanding the engines of its future. That, in his eyes, is the real threat. Because here's the truth: Trump has built his entire persona around control. He wants to project dominance, strength, an image of America first, America unchallenged. But how does that image hold when the people defining the future of American life are not the ones he considers part of his narrative? When the most powerful tech leaders, the gatekeepers of information, the architects of artificial intelligence, are people whose roots stretch thousands of miles away, he doesn't see it as diversity. He sees it as losing control of America's crown jewels. This isn't about jobs on the factory floor. This isn't about cheap labor or immigration debates. This is about the very core of American influence, its grip on technology. And when Trump sees names like Sundar Pichai and Satya Nadella steering companies worth trillions, he recognizes a brutal truth. Those companies shape America's global image more than the White House does. Their leaders wield more cultural power than half of Washington combined. And the fact that they are Indians is not something he can spin away. It's a reality he cannot dominate. That fear, of course, comes dressed up as bravado. He'll say it's about protecting American interests. He'll frame it as safeguarding innovation. He'll thunder on about how America should remain in American hands. But deep down, the fear is personal. It's the realization that his version of American greatness is slipping through his fingers, replaced by a new breed of leaders who don't fit his mold of what an American CEO should look like. And unlike politicians, you can't bully them into line. They don't need his approval. They don't depend on his patronage. They built their power through merit, not politics. And here's the kicker. His fear isn't just about today. It's about tomorrow. If Indians are already dominating tech leadership now, what happens in 10 years? What happens when their children, raised in America, but armed with the same discipline and ambition, take the reins? What happens when the wave of Indian talent flooding universities today matures into the next generation of entrepreneurs and executives? Trump knows exactly what happens. The balance of power shifts even further away from the America he wants to preserve. That's the fear he can't shake. That's why the warnings sound so sharp, so urgent. Because for once, this isn't a battle he can win with tariffs or tweets. This is a battle of intellect, innovation, and relentless drive. And it's a battle America's Indian minds are already winning. Power today isn't measured by how many tanks you have, how many warships sail under your flag, or how loud your politicians shout at rallies. Real power is measured in market value, in global influence, in the ability to dictate the terms of progress. And that power now sits squarely in the hands of a handful of technology giants worth trillions of dollars. The people steering those ships are not old guard American dynasties, but Indian-born executives who have climbed their way to the summit of the global economy. That is economic clout on a scale most governments can only dream of. Think about it. Google is worth nearly $2 trillion. Microsoft isn't far behind. These companies aren't just successful businesses, they are modern-day empires. They control information, communication, data, and increasingly, the future of artificial intelligence. Their CEOs have the ability to shape stock markets, influence government policy, and set the agenda for how the world evolves technologically. That's not just corporate success. That's geopolitical leverage. And when the people pulling the strings come from outside the traditional American elite, it shakes the very foundations of who really holds the reins of global power. And here's what makes it even more staggering. These companies are not limited by borders. They operate in every country, on every continent. When Microsoft rolls out a new product, governments adapt. When Google changes its algorithm, entire industries collapse or thrive overnight. That kind of authority goes beyond economics. It seeps directly into politics. Political leaders know they cannot afford to alienate these companies. They know that a bad relationship with Silicon Valley could mean economic stagnation, lost investment, or a competitive disadvantage. Which means, in a quiet but undeniable way, Indian-led corporations are influencing the political strategies of nations. And let's be blunt, this influence is not subtle. When the leaders of these tech giants walk into a meeting with the President of the United States, or the Prime Minister of Britain, they're not just guests. They're equals. Sometimes they're the ones holding the stronger hand. Governments need them more than they need governments. They can invest billions in a country, or pull out and cripple entire sectors. They can open doors to global markets, or close them with the stroke of a pen. That's what real power looks like in the 21st century. It also explains why fear creeps in, because it's no longer about whether India as a nation is building aircraft carriers or nuclear weapons. It's about Indians already commanding institutions that hold more practical power than most militaries. This is soft power at its most potent, a kind of influence that can't be measured in missiles, but in market dominance, cultural impact, and political leverage. And the uncomfortable truth is that American politicians, Trump included, can't control it. They can criticize it, they can posture against it, but they cannot undo the reality that Indian leadership in technology has shifted the balance of global power. The old world order was shaped by armies and borders. The new world order is being shaped by algorithms and code, and those who control the code control the future. Right now, more often than not, those people happen to be Indians. For decades, the idea of the American dream was built around a very specific image: the small-town kid, born and raised in the United States, who rises to power through grit and determination. That was the mythology America sold to itself and to the world. But walk through the boardrooms of Silicon Valley today, and you'll see a very different picture. The people at the top don't fit the old Hollywood script. They are men and women who arrived from halfway across the world, who carried their culture, their values, their relentless work ethic with them. And in doing so, they've rewritten what the American dream actually looks like. This is more than just professional success. It's cultural transformation. Because when Indian origin leaders run companies like Google and Microsoft, they don't just bring technical brilliance. They bring an entirely new philosophy of leadership. They bring a perspective shaped by centuries of resilience, by a culture that prizes education, by families who teach that excellence is not optional, it's expected. And suddenly America finds itself absorbing this influence, reshaping its own understanding of ambition and identity. Look at the classrooms. Across America, Indian families emphasize education in a way that makes it almost a religion. Their children dominate spelling bees, excel in math Olympiads, and end up in the most elite universities in the country. And when they graduate, they don't just take jobs, they take charge. That drive filters into the wider society, changing what parents expect of their children, what companies demand of their workers, and what young people think is possible for their future. That's a cultural ripple effect, and it doesn't stop at America's shores. It spreads globally because the world watches who leads, and right now, it's watching Indians. And make no mistake, this shift unsettles many, because it challenges stereotypes. It disrupts the comfortable narrative that America alone is the world's talent factory. Instead, it shows that talent is global, that culture is exportable, and that the world's brightest minds can rise to the very top regardless of where they were born. For some, that's inspiring. For others, it's terrifying. But for everyone, it's undeniable. There's also something far deeper happening here. When you have Indians leading global companies, they don't just impact technology, they impact culture. The way workforces are managed, the way global teams operate, the way values are expressed inside corporations, it shifts. Suddenly empathy, patience, long-term thinking, qualities often dismissed in the Western boardroom, become central. Suddenly there's a blending of East and West in the very heart of corporate America. That is cultural power at its most subtle, but also its most effective. And here's the irony: the very people who once came to America to chase the dream are now reshaping it for future generations. They are redefining what it means to be successful, what it means to be American, and what it means to lead in a world that is no longer defined by borders. That, right there, is the cultural shift that has already happened, whether the political class likes it or not. When a man like Trump delivers a warning, you have to look beyond the noise. He thrives on drama, he thrives on spectacle, But underneath the theatrics there's always a truth he doesn't want to say out loud. And in this case, the warning directed at the giants of Google and Microsoft wasn't just a political jab. It was an admission that America feels the ground shifting beneath its feet, that the balance of power in its most prized industry has already begun to tilt away from its traditional grip. It wasn't a warning to Silicon Valley, it was a confession to the world. Because think about it. Leaders don't waste time attacking things they consider irrelevant. They don't warn about forces they believe are weak. They only lash out when they sense something slipping beyond their control. And that's exactly what this was. It was the sound of unease, the sound of someone realizing that the center of gravity in American innovation isn't controlled by the usual suspects anymore. It's shaped by people whose backgrounds, values, and ambitions lie outside his narrative of what American leadership is supposed to look like. This so-called warning, therefore, was less about cautioning companies and more about projecting insecurity. Trump was signaling to his base that he sees the change, that he recognizes the growing dominance of Indian-led tech powerhouses, but he frames it as a problem instead of a reality. It's almost like shouting at the tide as it comes in, loud, dramatic, but utterly powerless. Because this wave cannot be stopped, and deep down he knows it. What makes it even more revealing is the timing. The technology sector isn't just another part of the economy. It's the very engine of America's future. Artificial intelligence, cloud computing, cybersecurity, digital infrastructure. These are the battlefields of tomorrow. And if the most influential figures in these spaces aren't the ones Trump can claim as part of his American first rhetoric, then his entire political story weakens. The warning, therefore, becomes less about policy and more about narrative control. He's trying desperately to reframe dominance as danger, because acknowledging it as progress would shatter his script. But here's the twist: in giving that warning, he's done the exact opposite of what he intended. Instead of undermining these leaders, he's highlighted just how much power they hold. Instead of reassuring his audience that America remains firmly in control, he's admitted that the levers of power are already in different hands. His words, meant to sound commanding, came out sounding like surrender dressed in bravado. That's why it matters. The warning isn't just political theater, it's a signal that even the loudest voice in American politics cannot ignore the reality of Indian dominance in the tech world. A signal that the rise of these leaders isn't just acknowledged, it's feared. And most importantly, a signal to the rest of the world that the new hierarchy of global influence is already here, and no speech, no threat, no bluster can reverse it. So let's be absolutely clear. This isn't just about Google. It isn't just about Microsoft. This is about a revolution that has already happened. A revolution led not by armies or politicians, but by minds. Relentless, disciplined, brilliant minds who have risen to control the beating heart of the digital age. And when someone like Trump raises his voice in warning, don't mistake it for strength. See it for what it truly is: fear. Fear that the old order is crumbling. Fear that the narrative of American supremacy is being rewritten. Fear that the future now has an Indian accent. The world is watching, and the signal has been sent. The balance has shifted. The question isn't whether Indians will continue to dominate the future of technology. The question is how long it will take before the rest of the world accepts it. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the reality no warning can silence, no speech can undo, and no politician can stop. The age of Indian dominance in global tech has begun, and it's only getting stronger.